Thanks so much for joining today. My name is Jasper, and I'm co-founder and head of product at GoodTime.io. Today, I'll be sharing some talent industry data that we've collected over the last few years at GoodTime. For those of you not familiar with GoodTime, we deliver the best candidate experience for top brands like DoorDash, Pinterest, Shopify, Slack, and Zoom. GoodTime helps these companies connect candidates to the most optimal interview panels to help showcase their company culture, their talent brand, and their commitment to diversity. The data that I'm sharing today is sampled from 3.4 million interviews and has helped us better understand how the world is shifting and changing. The pandemic has had a profound impact on the future of work. It accelerated a decade's worth of change management in remote and hybrid working environments overnight and gave birth to the distance economy. However, at the same time, it reset progress of representation of minority groups such as women interviewers back by almost a year. 2020 could easily mark one of the most difficult times talent teams have faced over the last few decades. From massive layoffs and furloughs that led to a staggering unemployment rate of 15%, to talent shortages where millions of jobs were left vacant on the market, 2020 was full of surprises. The convergence of the connected world, coupled with ample periods of time for knowledge workers to think and converse about their future careers, led to an incredibly frothy candidate market. Companies struggled to meet their hiring targets as jobs outpaced qualified workers by 1.6 million in the US alone. 2020 marked the first time Millennials and Gen Z represented a majority portion of the workforce. While generation shifts are not a new concept, the transition points provide opportunities for workplaces to reimagine or transform themselves, and this shift overlapped the pandemic as well as huge shifts in the eco-political climate as well. And in 2020, due to the widespread adoption of remote work, candidates no longer needed to commit full days off to participate in all-day interview panels. Video interview technology and willingness of companies to provide flexible interview scheduling enable candidates to incorporate interviews into their day far more easily. This reduction in friction translated into a 4x increase in candidate interview volume over pre-pandemic numbers. And looking on the talent side, for some companies, the Great Resignation is actually better described as the Great Reshuffle. Remote-enabled workplaces means access to more jobs, better roles, and potentially higher compensation packages. Post-pandemic adoption of remote work shows clearly on a heat map as more companies opened up hiring work outside of traditional hub cities. With increased competition and candidates itching to switch jobs, the scramble for talent quickly turned into a game of speed, where even a day of delay could mean a no hire. Talent leaders responded by ramping up their pipelines 2.3 times faster than before the pandemic. The social events of 2020 and 2021 that rocked the world changed how people thought about their employers as well. For the first time, organizational diversity and inclusion of all people entered in the top 3 things employees cared about when selecting a future employer. Ironically, while the total number of minorities that conducted interviews are growing, representation overall is slowly trending down. There's a gap between where candidates are looking for and what companies are providing when it comes to diversity and inclusion. If you dig a little deeper, Hispanic and Latino representation overall is growing the fastest at around 329% per year, while representation of Black interviews still remains far below that of their peers. As shown earlier, women representation in the interview workforce was reduced due to the pandemic. This is huge because we know that there's a downward spiral effect of non-representation. From our data, we know that female candidates are twice as likely to accept a role when there's female representation on the interview panel. If you remember nothing else, candidates are leveraging technology to maximize their job opportunities and level up their careers or find a work style that's better suited for their lives. Forward-thinking talent leaders are taking every opportunity to leverage their tech stacks to create the best possible relationship with each and every candidate. Thank you so much for your time. To dig into more data, you can always visit us at www.goodtime.io, or I look forward to answering your questions during the Q&A.
My name is Scott Parker, as mentioned, the Director of Product Marketing here at GoodTime. Jasper has some really interesting data and insights that we've been pulling out of the system and through conversations with a lot of our customers over the last several years. Jasper, you said a few things in there that I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into, if you don't mind. One of the things was you mentioned that the growing millennial and Gen Z workforce, they're values of what they're looking for or what they value in a company is changing. The things they are different than what we've traditionally seen as hiring motivators, such as great snacks, beer on tap, the beanbag chair room, all those things that don't really exist anymore. How do talent teams relegated to a 1920 by 1080 Zoom window now convey to candidates that their company is a great place to work? How does company culture and company brand get conveyed effectively?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and one that I hear quite a bit from a lot of talent leaders because it's not like we have a choice sometimes in whether or not we can be on Zoom or whether or not we can be in person, especially with waves of COVID still in our general population and reoccurring. I think oftentimes we're relegated to, like you said, the screen in order to actually have these interactions. I think there's, one of the things that I like to think about is actually, I think Zoom might actually be one of the first large advancements in an opportunity for talent teams to actually interact on a deeper level with their candidates. And what I mean by that is, if you think about what's happened before and after the pandemic, one of the things that shifted is a lot of interviews that used to happen in person are coming online or over video. And this is one of the big things that we're seeing inside of our data as a lot of these final stage interviews that would normally require a trip from a candidate to come visit your office are not happening anymore. And where the delta is like we used to use that opportunity to really sell our candidates on what we were all about. And I think the biggest difference for me, I think, is seeing, one, now interviews are more focused on people rather than things. So like you mentioned, it's not the beanbag chair, the cool coffee you get, it's actually the people that you get to interact with. And so your selling points are not your office anymore. It's actually the digital environment that you're operating inside of. And in that sense, I think one of the big highlights there is the interview process is now actually one step closer to what this person might experience on a daily basis if they are going to become a remote or hybrid worker where they would spend some of their time working in office and other times working remotely. The other thing that I think is pretty cool is I think this offers a chance to kind of level the playing field. Like not everybody is very fortunate to have offices that are as well furnished as like let's say like Google or one of these big offices that are obviously cost millions and millions of dollars. This helps kind of allow companies of different sizes to kind of really showcase who they are even more upfront than being kind of like rocking and dazzling somebody when they walk in the door. On the flip side, actually, from the candidate side of things, I also think this opportunity is really, really huge in providing a potentially better candidate experience even. So being remote often reduces distractions and stress that are related to being in a brand new environment. And when you're going to do an interview, you're already stressed as it is. So candidates can dial in, being able to dial in from anywhere allows them to, one, not worry about being late. They don't have to worry about traffic or anything like that, as well as it also is a lot more inclusive in the interview process as some people don't do really well in environments that are different or new. They perform a lot better. So this allows candidates to interview from the comfort of their own home. And furthermore, I think allowing them to work from home or interview from home gives them a lot more flexibility. And so I think in you as a business, allowing for these remote interviews, like one of the innate advantages that you're actually sharing is you're actually showing them how you can be as an employer very flexible in this time. And I think, from a data standpoint, just because I'm very interested in the data side of things, one of the most interesting things about this time and era is like now, for the first time, interviews are a lot more trackable. Companies and technologies like Gong and Course enable you to record meetings. And then also you can digitally capture the start and end times of these interviews to make sure they're starting on time and ending on time. So I think it's really, really cool. Even though we may be in this position against our will, this may actually be an opportunity. And I've seen a lot of companies seize this opportunity and really help increase not only candidate experience, but also help them share who they are a lot more intimately than they did before.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess follow up to that, then what can companies do to align, with this new audience and this new remote first normal that we're all experiencing?
Yeah, I think, one being remote first, as well as kind of the slide that we shared earlier on Gen Z as well as millennials, one of the things that is very, very notable is the shift in what people consider important. And I think this is really, really important to note when you're addressing an audience, is understanding what your audience is actually looking for. The top things I think are, well-being, ethical standards and leadership, as well as transparent leadership and ownership. And the most important thing and notable thing that I've noticed that has entered into the market, according to Gallup research, is diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And so one of the things I think companies struggle with is being able to showcase all of these things in an interview process that is, half of it's designed to help you understand if this is the right person or for the job, and the other half is actually helping that person understand if this is the right job for them. And so one of the things I think that is very, very clear, and we've seen a lot of organizations try to do this as they go more remote, as they go and try to share some of these like cultural beliefs with their candidates, is really just seeing is believing. And so what I mean by that is when you're having these interviews, like who is on your interview panel is a really strong indicator, more so even than like your career pages and stuff like that, which may talk about how much your company cares about diversity and inclusion. If you have a diverse and inclusive interview force, that actually speaks volumes. And I think that's one of the things that is sometimes overlooked. This was one of the kind of like sad data points that we discovered shortly after COVID hit. We noticed that the population of women in interview positions had sharply dropped. In fact, it negated the last like 1.5 years of growth that had been happening before COVID. I'm happy to say that it's back on track, but essentially the population or representation of women in interviewing is growing by about 4% year over year. And so having a drop even in that pattern is actually quite alarming, but it is also, it goes to show like how people are paying attention to these things. And I think when you show that on your interview panel, then you can actually you can basically not only say that you believe in these things, you can actually show your candidate groups that these things matter.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Let's see. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, you focused on data quite a lot in your presentation. What kind of data should talent teams perhaps be focusing on? What should they be measuring? What kind of outcomes are we looking to drive?
Yeah, I think when I think about data, I think there's lots of available data out there, and I think I like to split it up in like groups. Like there's like data, which I think is like they can be like tables, numbers, and stuff that is information that's available. And I think a lot of teams collect this information. And oftentimes, like in today's modern world, you have so much data, you actually don't know what to do with it. And then I think there are kind of focused results and outcomes, or these types of data that you can actually use to aggregate to figure out what's happening in your organization. So I think today, talent teams are definitely getting really, really good at measuring what I consider like results and outcomes. So what I mean by that is these are the types of things that help you kind of initially figure out like potentially where you're headed, how close you got to your goals. So things like hiring attainment, time to fill, cost per hire, candidate NPS. If your team are measuring these things, then you're way ahead of the curve, because these are like key indicators to help you understand how successful or how much opportunity for more success your team has. Things like pipeline metrics and pass-through rates are also kind of more advanced versions of these. And then even peering into the diversity of your employee count versus your applicant pool. These are things I think that technical recruiting teams are very good at acquiring this type of data. Now, there's another classification of data that I think is quite important as, data is becoming more and more mature of a tool set to use in recruiting, which I call actionable insights. So these are actually similar to the data that we're talking about before, but they help measure things that can help your organization actually make changes. So not only just like, for example, time to hire is like a very common KPI for you to be able to measure. And the thing that's awesome about it is it tells you how well you're doing or where you're at, but it actually doesn't really tell you how to fix, if you wanted to decrease your time to hire, for example, it doesn't give you a lot of insight into making those changes. And so actionable insights are things that allow you to, looking at the data, make decisions about how to change your organizational structure, your processes, or your people in order to accommodate or change and make headway in a particular KPI that you care about. So, for example, time to hire, breaking that down by average time to schedule, your number of interviewers that are available that open up availability, your interviewers load balancing so that you understand how how much burnout that each of them are going to have, and then also accounting for things like the number of reschedules that have to occur and the reasons why. These are a lot more indicative of how you can change your system. For example, if you have only 3 interviewers that are available for a particular position, if you're measuring an actionable insight such as that, you can actually understand, hey, my bottleneck in the process, the interview process, is actually the fact that I only have 3 interviewers. And by understanding that piece of information, you can now action against that and say, I actually need to train a few more interviewers to interview for that position, or else my maximum output is going to be X as opposed to Y, which may be the more desirable target that you have. A few more examples, I guess, I think, going into kind of like actionable insights, because I think this is quite important. And if you're not measuring or have access to actionable insights, I think this is something that you'll want to go and talk to your data team about or do some research against it, or things like candidate NPS and diversity and inclusion are pretty huge. Candidate NPS, I think, is one of the best ways to understand overall how your interview process is appealing to candidates. But the thing that's really difficult about that is you get this information at the very tail end of the interview process, sometimes months after actually doing the interviews, and it gives you a general understanding if you're doing well or not, but it doesn't really point to opportunities for improvement. So, an actionable insight that's similar to net candidate NPS would be what I would call candidate pulse. And these are things that you can take immediately after each interview set, and they can point at very, very specific things like, like the types of questions that were asked. They can even measure your candidate's excitement level at each interview stage so that you can understand, hey, which one of these stages of my interview replenish or drain my candidate's excitement when they're going through the interview process. And then which interviewers even need to brush up on how to ask questions, because maybe you'll have like, you can have a hotspot where, hey, after interview Y, this particular set of candidates that went through this interview that were exposed to these sets of interviewers had a very unpleasant experience. And so that's like very actionable. You can actually make a change and understand how to fix your processes to better accommodate your candidates. And on the last kind of topic of diversity and inclusion, I think this is where I think focusing really on who's represented inside of your panel is really huge. And this is a data point that we gathered from our the interviews that we've been doing over the last 3 to 5 years. And we just showed that, for any underrepresented group, for example, like let's say women in recruiting, for every 1% increase in representation of a diversity segment in your hiring managers, there is actually a 2% increase in acceptance rate. And to kind of illustrate like how important that actually is let's say you have company A who has 20% women hiring managers and company B who has 50% women hiring managers. Company B will actually have 60% higher acceptance rates from female identifying candidates, which is crazy to think about, because company B, just by changing that one small metric, can actually really hugely increase the pace at which they're going to be able to hire additional people who look and act and come from the same backgrounds as these individuals. And so I think that was something that was quite shocking. And actively tracking these numbers will allow you to not only understand where you're lacking. But if you see these things, you can actually start understanding how to train and plan how to organize and grow your group of hiring managers so that underrepresented groups could be better modeled inside of your interview workforce. And then eventually that will turn into your future workforce as well too.
Absolutely. So why don't people measure these things more effectively today? I've talked to many customers and they struggle with either identifying the data points they want to track or finding ways to effectively track them.
Yeah, I can tell you for sure it's not lack of desire, because most people, when we talk about these types of data points, like definitely want access to these things. I think it's really just a matter of resource limitation, tooling limitations, and actually access to accurate data. And this is like oftentimes where you'd love to throw money at the problem, but money doesn't grow on trees. And so really figuring out what you can do with your existing tool set or with new tool sets that you can acquire, or how you can clean up existing data sets to help provide these types of actionable insights is a great way to head in the right direction. But yeah, I don't think it's because people don't want to measure these things. I think they would all love to have access to the data if they could have it.
Absolutely. You mentioned candidate relationship, which is something that we've been talking about quite a bit. I'm hearing it more and more in the space. It seems a little bit different than the very popular concept of candidate experience. Can you give us a little bit of detail around the relationship and what the value it provides to both candidates and interviewers, and maybe what does a great relationship look like?
Absolutely. The very first thing is I don't want to say like one is not the other, but I think one is built upon the other. So I think great relationships always start with great experiences. If you liken it to like dating, for example, if you have a terrible first 3 dates, the likelihood of you developing a meaningful relationship is a lot less than if you have like 3 awesome, initial encounters. And I think this is really important when you're thinking about it. I think, a lot of companies are thinking about the right things today. They're thinking about how is my brand represented? What are my processes? Are the, job descriptions clear? Have we trained our teammates well so they have consistent interviewing practices? Are we communicating in a timely and transparent manner? These are all really important, I think, baselines for that. But I think what's really changing is not the things that we're doing as talent teams, but actually the expectation of the candidates themselves is actually starting to shift. They're really looking for, working for places that, resonate with them as individuals as much as they can see. And I think one of the best things is really, in order to have these types of genuine conversations and to allow these candidates to have, a good peek into what your business is all about, it's really about the time that's spent, with your interviewers and like the quality of that particular time. Candidates today, they're actually interviewing at 4 times as many jobs as before. And so they really want to know, not just from reading these like kind of cookie cutter job posts or, videos that we present, they really want to understand from individuals, hear it kind of like firsthand from the people that they're talking to. Does the employee care about flexibility, my well-being? Do they, what are their ethical kind of, where's their ethical compass pointed to? What's their culture like? Can they really commit to D&I, or are they just talking about it, right? These things are very, very evident when you do talk to somebody. And I think one of the things that was also interesting is when you ask candidates today, like what's the number one perk, it's actually flexibility. And so over the yoga room or beanbag chairs, like you were talking about, it's really the flexibility for them to make choices. And so I think video is definitely making it easier, but really making sure that you're not only represented from like a factual standpoint inside of your interviews, but actually the relationships that are starting to develop inside of there, because these candidates are meeting with their future coworkers, really have the opportunity to be meaningful. And so I often give the advice like, hey, a really good interview should feel like an amazing conversation, right? It's 2 ways, because it's not just one side evaluating the other. It's actually both sides evaluating each other. And that's why I like to move over to this concept of relationships, because it's not a one way. Like experience, I think, is like putting on a show, is what it sounds like. And the feeling is like, hey, it's a single directional thing, but today, I think candidate relationship is really understanding how to shape your processes and your people to where they understand that this is a two-way street.